Yesterday, Theron had told her he had filled the tank. Did the car consume that much, or had Theron forgotten to fill it up? Zinea slowed down. She couldn't risk running out of gas in the middle of a deserted highway like this. She saw a sign indicating a rest area with a gas station, about 3 miles ahead. Zinea decided to stop for a moment. Besides getting gas, she wanted to use the restroom and wash her face to wake up. She put on her left blinker and slowed down as the car veered into the rest area. The place looked deserted. There were only a few trucks parked with drivers sleeping inside, and a sedan parked in a far corner. The neon lights of the gas station buzzed softly, surrounded by moths. The attendant looked drowsy, sitting on a bench near the pumps. After parking the car next to a pump and asking the attendant to fill it up, Zinea leaned back in the seat. Her body felt sore. She grabbed the bag Theron had packed for her to get her wallet. As she reached into the bag, she felt a bunch of things packed quite tight. There was a water bottle, the sandwiches, and a jacket. Zinea dug deeper to find her wallet, which she usually kept in an inner pocket of the bag. But instead of the soft leather of her wallet, her fingertips touched a cold, hard, metallic surface. Zinea frowned. She didn't remember having anything like that in her purse. With curiosity, she moved the jacket covering the bottom of the bag aside. Hidden there was a black metal box, about the size of a small brick. The object looked strange to her. It had no brand, no inscriptions, just a sturdy black box with some thin wires visible at the joints. What made Zinea's heart suddenly race was a small indicator light on one side of the box, blinking with a faint red light. Slowly, Zinea took the box out of the bag. It was quite heavy. She turned it over under the dome light of the car. This ain't no power bank, she thought. Its shape was too rough to be a common electronic accessory. It wasn't an internet modem either. A feeling of unease began to creep up the back of her neck. Why had Thien put this in her bag? Was it one of Theron's work tools that had slipped in by mistake? But why was it in her travel bag? And why was that light blinking as if the device was active? Zinea looked for a button to turn it off. She was afraid the object would drain the battery or damage other things in her bag. She found a small switch on the side. Without thinking twice, Zinea. When I opened my purse, I froze at the sight of a strange device inside. Sensing something was terribly wrong, I took it straight to the nearest police precinct. After examining it, an officer walked over to me, his face twisted with panic and fear, and said, "Danger, ma'am. This isn't just some random gadget." I stood there in shock, unable to believe the explanation the officer gave me. But before we start the story, please write in the comments what part of the world you are watching this from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can keep growing and bring you even more fascinating stories. The atmosphere in the bedroom was quiet and peaceful. The only sound was the soft hum of the central air conditioning wrapping around the night. The hands of the clock on the wall moved with a steady rhythm, marking exactly 3:00 the morning. Zinea was still deep in a calm, heavy sleep. Her dreams felt distant and fuzzy. However, that calm was shattered when the landline on the nightstand rang with a piercing shrillness. The ring tore through the silence of the night like a long scream, forcing her consciousness to claw its way back to the surface. Zinnia woke with a start, her heart hammering a mile a minute. She blinked, trying to gather the pieces of her soul still scattered in the dream world. Her hand fumbled in the darkness for the receiver. Who would be calling at such an ungodly hour? She thought with apprehension. Calls this late never brought good news. With a trembling hand, she lifted the receiver and brought it to her ear. Her voice sounded raspy as she greeted the person on the other end of the line. It was a man's voice, gripped by panic and haste. He said he was a neighbor of her mother, Ula, from down in the country. Without beating around the bush, he delivered the news that made Zinea's blood run cold in her veins. He told her that her mother, Ula, had suddenly lost consciousness and was in critical condition. Zinea's breath hitched. The image of her mother's face, elderly now, and living alone back home, flooded her mind instantly. Tears welled up in her eyes. The fear of losing the person she loved most tightened her throat until she couldn't breathe. The man on the phone urged her to come immediately as her mother's condition was worsening by the second. Zinea dropped the receiver, which fell back into place with a dry thud. She turned to the other side of the king-sized bed and shook the body of her husband, Theron, who was sleeping with his back to her. "Theron!" She screamed his name in desperation. Theron stretched slowly and opened his eyes with a look that was slightly annoyed yet serene. Zinea, between sobs and with a broken voice, explained that her mother was dying and she had to go back home right now. She expected Theron to jump out of bed, get ready, and grab the car keys to drive her like any supportive husband would. However, Theron's reaction was completely unexpected. The man sat up on the edge of the bed, rubbing his face slowly. Then he looked at Zinea with an indecipherable expression. He didn't seem alarmed at all. Theron grabbed her shoulders and tried to calm her down with a voice that was soft but firm. He said he would love to go with her, but today was a crucial day for his career. He reminded her of the important meeting with the board of directors taking place that very afternoon. That meeting would determine the future of the company and Theron's position in it. If he didn't show up, years of effort would go down the drain, and they could lose everything. Zinea fell silent, hearing her husband's explanation. A pang of disappointment shot through her heart. In such a critical moment, she desperately needed support. But she also knew how hard they worked to maintain their comfortable lifestyle. Zinea was an accommodating wife and always tried to understand her husband's position. Reluctantly, she swallowed her pride. She said she understood and would go alone. Theron nodded, saying it was the best option. He asked her to get ready quickly while he warmed up the car and packed. Very scarce. There were only 1 or 2 18-wheelers moving slowly in the right lane, hauling freight between cities. Otherwise, the road was just for Zinea. The silence in the car cabin was only broken by the sound of tires humming on asphalt and the soft gospel music Zinea had playing on the car's audio system at low volume. She needed that calm to keep her composure. Zinea was driving at a considerable speed. The speedometer needle held steady above the average limit. She wanted to get there as soon as possible. Every second that passed was torture for her, imagining her mother fighting death alone. However, amidst her anxiety, Zinea started to notice something strange about her vehicle. At first, she thought it was just her imagination due to fatigue and sleepiness, but the sensation became increasingly real. The car, which normally glided smoothly, now felt a bit heavier. A fine vibration traveled up from the bottom of the car to the steering wheel she was gripping. It wasn't a normal vibration. It was different from what you feel when hitting a bump. It sounded like a low, constant hum, as if something was attached to the engine or the chassis of the car and affecting its aerodynamics. Zinea tried to ignore it. She thought maybe the car just needed a routine checkup that Theron might have overlooked due to his busy schedule. She tried to stay focused on the road. An hour passed, and Zinea was already far from the city. The darkness on both sides of the highway was getting denser, dominated by woods and fields that couldn't be seen. Suddenly, the gas indicator on the dashboard blinked orange. Zinea frowned. She remembered that the day before, she realized that legally she was entitled to a considerable fortune. Preparations for the awards gala began 3 weeks before the event. Cassius had been nominated as one of the most outstanding architects of the year, and of course, he expected Zolani to accompany him. However, his expectations regarding his wife's appearance were specific and humiliating. "I hope you don't wear one of your embarrassing rags," he said one morning during breakfast. "You know how these events are. All the important people will be there, and I can't let you make a bad impression on my account." Zolani decided to design and make her own gown for the occasion. It was an ambitious project, a midnight blue evening gown with hand-embroidered gold details that took weeks to complete, but every stitch was made with a purpose. Every detail designed to prove she was much more than Cassius believed. While she sewed late into the night, Zolani wasn't just planning the details of the dress, but also the moves she would execute in the coming weeks. Sequoia had confirmed that her legal analysis was correct. Solani was entitled to a substantial portion of Cassius's assets, and with the right strategy, she could claim much more than he could ever imagine. The night before the event, Zalani was in her studio putting the final touches on the dress. Cassius came down, probably to make some derogatory comment about her work, but he was left speechless for a moment upon seeing the finished gown. "Not bad," he said finally, though his tone couldn't hide his surprise. "I guess after so much time, you had to learn something." Zani didn't respond. She hung the dress carefully and headed for the stairs, but before going up, she stopped and turned toward Cases. "Tomorrow will be a very special night," she said with a smile he couldn't interpret. That night, Zalani stayed awake until very late, staring at the ceiling of her bedroom. Cassius slept deeply beside her, completely oblivious to what was coming. Galani got up quietly, went to the bathroom, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was no longer the same one who had accepted years of humiliation. There was a determination in her eyes she had never felt before. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow everything changes. She went back to bed, but didn't sleep. She watched Case's serene face as he slept. There was something almost poetic about the fact that he was resting peacefully, unaware that this would be the last night of his supposed superiority. Solani knew that after the awards gala, nothing would ever be the same. The day of the event dawned with a clear sky and crisp air that seemed to foreshadow a positive change. Zalani woke up early as usual, but this time there was something different in her movements. Every gesture was more decisive, every step firmer. The time had come to take off the mask of submission she had worn for years. As she prepared for what would be the most important night of her life, Solani looked at herself one last time in the mirror. The woman reflecting back was no longer the same one the story started with. She was someone completely new, someone who had waited patiently for years for the perfect moment. And that moment had finally arrived. The majestic Grand Sterling Hotel glittered with an elegance that only money can buy. Golden lights reflected in the polished marble lobby where the creme de la creme of the construction industry had gathered for the most important event of the year. Galani stepped out of the car with a grace that surprised even herself. The midnight blue dress she had made fit her body perfectly, and the gold embroidery caught the light of the chandeliers in a magical way. Cassius, impeccable in his tuxedo, walked beside her with the confidence of someone who knows all eyes are on him. But this time, eyes were also drawn to his wife, though he didn't seem to notice. Solani had achieved something she hadn't managed in years, standing out without apparent effort, radiating a natural elegance that was impossible. Pressed it. However, instead of turning off, the indicator light, which was previously blinking slowly in red, suddenly changed to yellow and began to blink at a faster rhythm. A soft rhythmic beep was heard. Beep, beep. The sound was like a countdown on a digital clock. A glacial chill ran from her fingertips through her entire body. Her instinct was screaming that something was wrong, very wrong. She remembered the action movies she had watched with the About trackers, or even something more dangerous. But this was the real world, and she was just an ordinary housewife. It was impossible for there to be an object like this in her bag. She tried to dismiss those bad thoughts, but the tremor of fear wouldn't go away. She looked at the gas station attendant who was closing her fuel cap outside the window. The outside world seemed normal, but inside this car, Zenaya felt she was holding a deadly mystery. Zenaya placed the object back on the passenger seat very carefully, as if it were made of thin, fragile glass. She grabbed her wallet with a hand shaking violently, paid the attendant for the gas without saying much, and quickly rolled up the window. She didn't go to the bathroom anymore. Her urge to urinate disappeared suddenly, replaced by a baseless but very intense terror. She looked at the black object, now blinking in yellow. Her mind was a whirlwind. Should she call Thuran and ask him? But a little voice inside her forbade it. The image of Thuran's face on the porch, that indecipherable smile, and his decision not to go with her to see her mother, All the puzzle pieces spun in Zenaya's head. If Theon had put this object in and it looked dangerous, then calling Theron might not be a good idea. Zenaya took a deep breath, trying to control herself. She couldn't panic. She had to find out what this object really was. Zenaya started the engine, but she didn't head back toward the highway entrance. Her instinct told her that continuing the trip with that strange object was suicide. She remembered that about 3 miles before the highway entrance, she had seen a sign indicating the nearest sheriff's precinct. Maybe that was the safest place for now. She would ask the police for help to examine the object. If it turned out to be just a harmless work tool of the she, would apologize and continue her trip. But if it was something else, Zenaya didn't dare to keep thinking. With hands soaked in cold sweat, Zenaya turned the steering wheel, taking the car out of the rest area via a back exit, moving away from the highway toward a dark, lonely back road. The object on the seat next to her kept emitting its beep, 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 like a travel companion carrying a message of death. Zenaya sped through the night, no longer to save time for her mother, but to save her own life from a terrifying uncertainty. Zenaya turned the car and pulled into the precinct parking lot, which looked deserted, but was well lit by floodlights. The building wasn't very big, with weathered paint and the U.S. flag waving slowly on the pole at the entrance. There was only one patrol car parked, and several officers, motorcycles. Zinnia parked her car a bit far from the main entrance, driven by an instinct telling her to keep the vehicle away from the building. After turning off the engine, silence reigned again, only interrupted by the rhythmic beeping of the black box on the seat next to her, which now sounded increasingly threatening. With hands still trembling, Zenaya picked up the black box. She carried it carefully, as if carrying her own life in the palm of her hand. She got out of the car and ran toward the front desk. The cold night air chilled her bones and made strands of her hair flutter, but a cold sweat soaked her back. Inside the station, a young officer dozing in a chair behind the reception counter straightened up immediately upon seeing a woman arrive with a pale face and shallow breathing at such a lonely hour. Zenaya placed the black box on the officer's wooden counter with a stiff movement. The young officer frowned, looking at the strange object whose indicator light was blinking rapidly in yellow. Zenaya tried to speak, but her voice got stuck in her throat. She could only point at the object while stammering that she had found it in her bag and thought it was dangerous. The officer seemed confused at first and was about to touch the box. Maybe he thought it was just a normal electronic gadget that was broken or lost. But before his fingers touched the metal surface of the box, a firm, authoritative voice stopped him from behind. A middle-aged man in full uniform with a detective's badge on his belt stepped out of an inner office. It was Detective Vance, the head of the precinct, who happened to be working overtime reviewing some files, his sharp eyes immediately fixed on the black box on the counter. His face, previously serene, tensed up in a matter of seconds. He immediately ordered the young officer to back up and step away from the counter. Detective Vance approached slowly, observing the blinking pattern of the light and the thin wires visible in the cracks of the box. Without touching it, the atmosphere in the room changed drastically, becoming oppressive. Detective Vance looked at Zenaya seriously and asked her where she had gotten that object. Zenaya explained with a trembling voice that she had found it in her bag during a trip out of town. Vance nodded slowly and grabbed his radio. He spoke in police codes that Zenaya didn't understand, but the tone of his voice was of extreme urgency. He requested the nearest EOD.